When I got back from a routine work trip, my daughter-in-law had updated my entire house like it was a set for a minimalist magazine spread. An hour later, she was pacing in the driveway, whisper shouting into her phone, demanding to know why officers were asking for her full legal name. If you're watching this, hit subscribe and tell me where you're tuning in from. But let me rewind and explain how an ordinary Tuesday turned into the most clarifying day of my 61 years. I'm Laurel Whitman, and until this fall, I believed I understood my daughter-in-law. I believed I understood the careful truce we'd maintained since my son, Mark, married Sabrina 8 years ago. I was mistaken about all of it. The trip had been nothing special. Seattle for 2 days, checking progress on a renovation, lunch with a lumber supplier, the everyday work that's been my life at Whitman Builders since my husband Thomas died 3 years ago. Mark manages our crews and scheduling now. I still handle audits, contracts, and the big accounts. Or so I thought. My flight landed late thanks to a ground stop over the Rockies, so it was nearly 10 on a Tuesday night when I turned onto our street in North Boulder. The porch light, which Sabrina always left on when I traveled, was dark. I fumbled with my keys, pushed the door open, and froze. My living room, Thomas's, and my living room was a sterile, white-walled showroom. The rich cedar accent wall Thomas had milled himself was buried beneath matte paint. My grandmother's sideboard, our storm gray leather sofa with the softened arms, the quilt my mother and I stitched during Mark's senior year, all missing. In their place, sharp-edged, glossy pieces that looked like they'd been ordered by someone who cared more about Instagram than living. "Surprise," Sabrina called from the top of the stairs, blonde hair smooth and immaculate even at that hour. "Don't be mad. I took the liberty of refreshing a few things while you were gone." I set my carry-on down and made my mouth shape words. "Where's my furniture, Sabrina?" "That old stuff. Donated." She descended with a slow, satisfied smile. "You'll thank me later. The house finally feels current." My grandmother's rocker, the one Lily loved to snuggle in while I read, gone. Thomas's reading chair, the coffee table Mark banged his toddler head on, and we never threw away because life leaves marks, gone. "You had no right," I said quietly. "Actually, I did." She flashed papers from a countertop that used to be walnut and was now a slab of icy quartz. "Mark signed off months ago. As his wife, I have authority over household decisions. Anyway, you'll need to get used to the new arrangement." "What arrangement?" "My parents are moving in," she said, casual as the weather. "Easier to have all the dead weight under one roof." Her parents, Pam and Gerald Collins, had a long history of bad luck. They hadn't held steady jobs in years, yet somehow always sported new gadgets and took gifted trips. I wanted to shout. Instead, I listened to the internal warning bell that's kept me alive in business. Don't swing blind. Learn the plan. Count the pieces. "Where would everyone sleep?" I asked, somehow steady. "You'll move into the guest room." Sabrina examined a flawless manicure. "Mom and Dad will take the primary suite. They need space for their medical equipment." "My room," I said, because sometimes you have to hear the words out loud to accept the theft. "Already moved your things." She smiled as if she'd done me a favor. I didn't argue. Not then. Because 3 weeks earlier, I'd stumbled across something about Sabrina that made this stunt feel small. Something that turned my private world into a loaded chessboard. My daughter-in-law wasn't just rearranging throw pillows. She was taking money, cleanly, cleverly, and in amounts that could capsize our company if anyone outside the family noticed. And I had been keeping her secret. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been at the office after hours, trying to reconcile a few nagging mismatches I'd flagged in our quarterly report. Whitman Builders is the house Thomas and I built together, and protecting it felt like protecting him. At first, the mismatches were petty, a few $100s, a random 1,000. Then I zoomed out, cross-referenced, and felt my stomach drop. As Mark's wife and our administrative coordinator, Sabrina had access to invoices and vendor setup. What I uncovered, by the glow of an old desk lamp and the hush of a quiet office, was a tidy pattern of thefts, payments to paper vendors, inflated material costs with the difference diverted to a secondary account, even bonuses to employees who never received them. Over 18 months, she'd drained nearly $200,000. My first instinct was to call Mark, shake him awake with proof. But I pictured his face. Mark adores his wife. She changed him, made him laugh again after his dad died. Lily and Ben, 10 and 7, love their mother. Exposing Sabrina wouldn't just burn her. It would shred Mark, scorch our grandkids, and nuke our reputation in a town where reputation builds houses. So I made a choice that was both loyal and foolish. Handle it quietly. I'd confront Sabrina in private, press for a repayment plan, and spare the family the fallout. Dignity preserved, lives unbroken. I was naive. The next morning I asked Sabrina to meet at a diner on Iris. Sticky menus, perfect hash browns, decent coffee, the kind of place where gossip dies in the sizzle of the grill. She arrived 20 minutes late, apologizing with that practiced sincerity people mistake for kindness. Sliding into the booth, she asked what was up. "I've been reviewing the books," I began, voice calm. "There are irregularities, missing funds, vendors that don't exist." Her face did not move, but her fingers tightened slightly around her mug. "It looks like someone is siphoning from the business," I continued. "That's awful," she said, wide-eyed. "Do you think the bank, or maybe one of the office gals?" If I hadn't seen the entries myself, I might have believed her. "Sabrina," I said softly, "it's you." For one beat, her eyes acknowledged it. Calculation. Then something like relief. "Prove it," she said low. My entire approach was upside down. I had assumed shame. I had assumed remorse. Instead, she leaned in like a lawyer who already knows the verdict. "You have documentation you'll never show Mark," she continued evenly, "because you love your son too much to blow up his marriage and traumatize your grandchildren. Because you care more about keeping the family intact than recouping money that's already gone." She was right, and we both knew it. "Here's what's going to happen." She stirred sugar into her coffee with surgical neatness. "You're going to stop poking around in records you're frankly too old to manage. In return, I'll be more careful." Not, "I'll stop." I'll be more careful. I should have walked straight out and driven to the police station. Instead, I nodded, and Sabrina smiled, the sweet expression that never reached her eyes. "Glad we understand each other. Family harmony is everything." She floated out, tossing, "See you Sunday," like confetti. I realized I had just negotiated my way into a trap. The changes began tiny. Sabrina arrived late to Sunday dinner with elaborate apologies about school projects and a lip-curled traffic, then compliment insulted my meatloaf to my face. "So nostalgic, Laurel. We should try more modern cuisine, but you know how Mark loves comfort food." She began rearranging my kitchen every visit, labeling it help, then laughing when I couldn't find my own tools. My sturdy mugs quietly vanished, replaced by delicate bone china that felt like teacups in a museum. "These are more elegant for company," she told me, which company quickly revealed itself to be her friends and her parents, who began holding court in my living room as if I ran an event space. "You don't mind, do you, Laurel?" Sabrina would text from the driveway. "Our townhouse is so cramped." I minded very much, but Mark beamed at what he called Sabrina's efforts to bring families together. How do you explain that being included can feel like being erased? The worst moment came at Lily's 10th birthday. We had planned a fairy tale theme, just the two of us. I baked a 3-layer princess cake. Lily and I made tiny burlap flags and glittery pixie huts from craft sticks. The morning of the party, Sabrina roared up with her mother and a hatchback full of store-bought decorations. "Change of plans," she sang, bustling in. "We're doing pink and gold chic, so much more on trend." They stripped our handmade decorations and put up generic banners that screamed, "Party Warehouse." "But Grandma and I made the fairies," Lily whispered, proud voice wilting. "Oh, honey," Sabrina cooed, instantly saccharine. "Grandma tries so hard, but sometimes grown-ups have different taste. This will be prettier." When other parents arrived, they gushed, "Sabrina, this is stunning." "Thank you," she said graciously. "I was up all night putting it together." She served the cake I baked and accepted all the praise for the party she hijacked, and not one person realized they were in my home, at my table on my dime. That evening, while I quietly scraped frosting from plates, Mark wandered in, glowing. "Great party, Mom." Sabrina outdid herself. "Don't you think she should have discussed the decorations with me?" I asked carefully. He frowned, patient in that way grown children are patient with the elderly. "It's Lily's party. Sabrina knows what she likes." Lily and I had planned. "Mom," he interrupted kindly, "let's not make this complicated. You should be grateful she hosted here at all." Grateful for being allowed to host my granddaughter's party in my house. That night, staring at the ceiling in the guest room, I refused to call it mine. I understood Sabrina's true game. The money was one plan. The other plan was to surgically remove me from my own family, insult by insult, until even Mark couldn't see me clearly. A week later, I returned from a grocery run to a moving truck in my driveway. Men I did not know carried dressers through my door. Sabrina greeted me with that bright, dangerous smile. "I told you Mom and Dad would be here Tuesday." She had not told me. Pam and Gerald were already measuring my primary closet, discussing TV placement, as if they were comparing hotel rooms. "Temporary," Sabrina chirped, while her parents unpacked like settlers, "until they get back on their feet." Within days, my quiet home became a boarding house. Pam reorganized my kitchen again to suit her way of cooking, which mainly involved leaving pans to soak forever. Gerald annexed my living room TV to the constant churn of sports and talk radio. They ate my food, left my doors unlocked, and treated me as a helpful neighbor who'd wandered in with a fruit salad. The breaking point arrived at Lily's school play. She was Little Red Riding Hood, had memorized her lines earnestly, and had saved me a front-row seat with my name scribbled on an index card. 20 minutes before I was leaving, Sabrina appeared at my bedroom door with Pam behind her, clutching a bouquet. "So sorry. Change of plans," Sabrina chimed. "There's only room for 3 adults up front, and since Mother is Lily's grandmother..." She let the sentence hang. "I'm Lily's grandmother," I said evenly. "She saved me a seat." "She'll understand," Sabrina said, already turning away. "She's very mature." Their taillights disappeared down our street with my son in the passenger seat, and I stood at the window tasting bitterness. Then I grabbed my keys and drove myself. I bought a general admission ticket and took a seat in the back. Lily was perfect. Clear voice, brave grin, tiny red cape bobbing across the stage. Afterward, she spotted me and flew into my arms. "Grandma, you came. Did you see my part with the wolf?" "You were splendid," I told her. "The best red ever." "Why were you back there? I saved you a front seat," she asked, brows knitting. Before I could answer, Sabrina swooped in with Pam, all brisk smiles. "There you are. Come take photos with Grandmother Pam. She came all this way." It was a dagger disguised as etiquette. Maybe Grandma Laurel can take pictures. And so I did, framing a moment I should have been in, pressing the button on my own exclusion. Back in my guest room that night, I stopped telling myself I was protecting harmony. Protecting whom? The woman stealing from us with one hand and writing me out of my family with the other? No. If Sabrina wanted a quiet grandma who would slip into the background, she'd picked the wrong family. But I needed to understand the scope. If she thought she could get away with party decorations and furniture, what was happening at the office? The next day, while Sabrina was at home with a migraine, I went in. Alone with spreadsheets and bank statements, I found a second, bigger scheme. The $200,000 I'd discovered was just the appetizer. She'd fabricated an entire luxury remodel on paper, complete with forged permits, staged progress photos pulled from other sites online, and contracts signed with Mark's perfect signature. For 8 months, we'd been paying invoices to a shell company that routed funds to an account under Sabrina's control. The total, $437,000 and change. My hands shook, printing the worst of it. Not just because of the money, but the timing. The most brazen thefts were in the past 3 months, the exact window when she escalated her campaign at home. She wasn't just getting sloppy, she was accelerating to meet a deadline, planning something that needed cash, and my silence. Footsteps in the hallway. I tucked the folder under a boring stack of permit applications just as Sabrina leaned on the doorframe like the lady of the manor. "Laurel, Mark said you called in sick." "Headache," I said lightly. "Quieter here than at home." I hated how normal I sounded. "I forgot some files," she said, moving in like she owned the carpet. Her eyes skimmed my desk. "Feeling better?" "Much." I stood, gathering the folder I needed plus the folder I shouldn't have had. "I'll head home and rest." "Good idea," she said, smoothing an invisible wrinkle on her blouse. "Mom's making pot roast. She's so excited." Another little knife to the ribs. My kitchen. My groceries. "Lovely," I said, and walked out, knees shaky only when I reached my car. Sabrina knew something had shifted. That night she played doting daughter-in-law at my table, heaped praise on Pam's famous pot roast, and asked Ben about dinosaurs with radiant attention. But every few minutes her gaze cut to me, cool and measuring, like a chess player deciding whether to trade queens. While we washed dishes, Pam had forgotten. Sabrina drifted beside me with a towel. "Let me help," she said. "You look tired." We worked quietly, plates clinking, Gerald's TV booming from the other room. Then she said, "Conversational. I've been thinking about what you said about finances a few weeks ago." My hands paused on a glass. "I may have been defensive," she continued, voice all honey. "Money matters are stressful for someone your age." There it was again, that casual cruelty packaged as kindness. "I'm perfectly capable," I said. "Of course," she said, and pitched her voice just enough louder for Mark, passing through for a beer to hear. "But memory issues are so normal at your age. Nothing to be ashamed of." Mark paused. "Mom, if you're having trouble keeping track—" "I'm not," I said firmly. Sabrina touched his sleeve. "See how defensive she gets? It's typical." She was laying track, writing a script where my objections proved my decline. If she convinced Mark I was slipping, anything I said about her thefts could be dismissed as paranoia. That night I locked my guest room door, spread the printouts across the bed, and photographed every page, evidence that wouldn't disappear when Sabrina reorganized my desk. 3 days later, I doubled back to the office on a Saturday to fetch reading glasses I'd forgotten and heard Sabrina's voice behind Mark's door, low, urgent. I should have called out. Instead, I stood just outside and listened. Power of attorney should be straightforward given her obvious decline, she was saying. Mark's noticed the confusion. With her doctor's cooperation. No, the business accounts first. Once I control her finances, we can liquidate. The house will be trickier. If she's declared incompetent, we can force a sale for her own good. Force a sale of my home. Get me declared incompetent. Assisted living. Quietly out of the way. By Christmas we'll be done, she said. Mark will have full control of the company. Laurel will be settled where she can't hurt herself. Where I couldn't hurt myself. Or anyone else's plan. The beauty is he thinks this is his idea, Sabrina added, a soft, mean laugh. Every confused episode has been carefully orchestrated. I thought of the missing mugs, the rearranged drawers, the constantly shifting ground making me doubt my own memory. Gaslighting now had a spreadsheet and a deadline. I need another month to establish the pattern, she said. Then we'll speak with her doctor about the stress of finances at her age. Dr. Patel is very sympathetic to family concerns. My doctor of 30 years. Don't worry about the transfer, she finished. With proper documents, it isn't theft. Chairs scraped. Panic surged. I slipped into the supply closet as she came out, humming, locking up. I stayed in that dark closet until the building sighed and settled again, and when I emerged, I was not the same woman who had walked in for reading glasses. I had protected Sabrina to spare Mark and the kids. She mistook that restraint for weakness. She miscalculated. If Sabrina wanted a war, she was about to find out what happens when you underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. Sunday morning, I sat at the public library and taught myself more about financial crimes and elder exploitation in 2 hours than I learned in a year of newsletters. Monday, I called the Economic Crimes Division and asked for someone who did more than shuffle paper. Detective Maya Ruiz called me back before lunch. I expected voicemail mazes. Instead, I got a listener. Ms. Whitman, what you're describing is textbook financial exploitation, she said. Do you have documentation? Bank records, forged contracts, fake invoices, copies of emails, I said, and a timeline. Bring everything. Today, if you can. At 2:30, I sat across from a woman with sharp eyes and a legal pad. Detective Ruiz paged through my file, her expression tightening. This is sophisticated, she said. Your daughter-in-law didn't learn this on YouTube. She's been practicing, I said. We'll need to verify, interview, build the case. Normally that takes time. How much time? 6 weeks, she said. Longer if she covered tracks. Sabrina plans to have me declared incompetent within a month, I said. She's already priming my doctor. Detective Ruiz stopped making notes. That changes the posture. We prioritize cases with ongoing coercion. She reached for the phone. I'm putting together a team. By Wednesday, she had a financial analyst, an elder abuse investigator, and an assistant DA looped in. Thursday, my physician, Dr. Patel, called me in. He looked stricken. Laurel, I owe you an apology, he said, as soon as I sat. Sabrina approached me 6 weeks ago, concerned about your cognition. She had detailed examples. She brought articles about elder abuse. Said she wanted to be sure no one took advantage of you. How far did it go? I asked. She asked me to evaluate you and consider recommending a guardian for your finances. He shook his head. I let her weaponize my caution. I've already given a statement to the detective. She will not use my signature to hurt you. Friday morning, Detective Ruiz called. We're ready to move, she said. Be by your phone Monday at 10. For what? To hear we've got her in custody. I had one more piece to move. That afternoon, I asked Mark to meet me at a coffee shop across from the trailhead, neutral ground with big windows and no Sabrina. You sounded weird on the phone, he said, concerned. Are you okay? I slid a slim folder across the table. Sabrina has been stealing from the company, a lot, for a long time. He blinked, confused. She doesn't even... He stopped, mind catching up to memory. Admin access. I have proof, I said. $437,000 in the last 8 months alone, more before that. He read for 20 minutes. I watched the man I raised, honest, decent, absorb the worst betrayal of his life. Why didn't you come to me? He asked, voice emptied out. Because I thought I could fix it quietly, I said. I thought protecting you meant keeping the peace. He swallowed, jaw tight. What about Lily and Ben? They'll be with you, I said, where they belong. There's more, he said, not a question. I told him about the phone call, the power of attorney plan, the assisted living trap, the slow, deliberate campaign to paint me as confused. He gripped the table until his knuckles blanched. The police will arrest her Monday, I said softly. I wanted you to hear it from me. That weekend, Sabrina watched me like a cat watches a closed door. When she tried barbs, I let them fall flat. When she performed sweetness, I didn't flinch. She mistook serenity for surrender. Good. Let her. Monday dawned clear. I put on the navy suit Thomas always said made me look like a CEO who didn't suffer fools. Detective Ruiz had told me to keep my routine and stay reachable. At 8:30, Sabrina wafted into the kitchen in her robe, poured my coffee into one of her delicate cups, and leaned against the island like it was hers. You're up early, she observed. Couldn't sleep, I said, folding the paper. Thinking about the office. I've been thinking about that, too. She smiled, all frosting. You stepping back from the finances would be so good for everyone. Less stress for you. More time with the kids. That's thoughtful, I said. She blinked. She'd braced for a fight. So, you're open? At my age, I said mildly. I should be enjoying the view, not chasing invoices. We could meet with the accountant tomorrow, she said smoothly. A little too fast. Transfer signatory authority. Tomorrow sounds perfect, I said, picking up my purse. I should run errands. You should rest, she said quickly. I can handle the office. How kind, I said, and walked out to my car just as 2 unmarked sedans turned onto our street. I roamed the produce aisle for 45 minutes, pretending to inspect tomatoes. My phone rang. Ms. Whitman, Detective Ruiz, came the voice I was waiting for. We have Sabrina Collins, a.k.a. Sabrina Whitman, in custody. 3 clean words: justice, relief, an end to months of polite brutality. How did she take it? I asked. She's demanding a lawyer and blaming everything on your confusion, Ruiz said dryly. Also, fun twist. Pam and Gerald? Warrants in 2 states for fraud. Looks like your daughter-in-law learned at home. I felt a laugh bubble up, the kind that happens when you're too tired to cry. What now? I asked. Arraignment this afternoon, given the dollar amounts and the elder abuse component. Bail is unlikely. A pause. We also found guardianship paperwork in her briefcase. She planned to file this week. This week. If I had waited one more argument, one more humiliating dinner, one more play, Sabrina would have had legal control of my life. Thank you, I said. 2 words holding everything I had left. I drove home. The patrol cars were gone. Mark's truck was in the driveway. Through the window I saw him at the kitchen table, a man who'd just seen the floorboards of his life torn up. He lifted his head when I walked in. His eyes were red. I called in sick, he said. The kids are at school. I didn't know what to tell them. I sat beside him. We didn't speak for a minute. "She's been lying to me for years," he said, "not just about money." "I think so," I said. "How did I not see it?" "Because you're a good man," I answered. "Because you wanted to believe your wife?" "I thought you were becoming—" He stopped, ashamed. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you." "We protect each other," I said. "That's what we do now." He nodded, a start. The house felt different without Sabrina's presence, like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding finally released. That afternoon, we reclaimed my bedroom. We boxed Pam's things: cheap perfume, a plastic jewelry tree, a tangle of cords, and drove them to a donation center with a relief that felt like laughing in church. I stood in the doorway of my room, the room Thomas painted a shade of blue he called July sky, and felt it belonged to me again. "Mom," Mark said quietly from the threshold, "I want the kids here, if you'll have us." "If?" I said, turning, and in that small joke we found the beginning of a new story. That night, when Lily and Ben came home, we sat them on the sofa. Mark held their hands. "Where's Mom?" Lily asked. "She made some big mistakes with money," Mark said gently. "She's in trouble and she won't be home for a while." Ben's brow furrowed. "Like jail?" "Yes." Lily blinked fast, fighting tears. "Will people at school say things?" "They might," I said. "You tell them your mom made mistakes. That's on her. You are kind and smart and loved. That's on us." "Are we staying here?" Ben asked. "For as long as you want," I said. "This is your home." We began new routines because that's how people survive. One breakfast, one drive to school, one bedtime story, one laugh over a burnt pancake. In the evenings, Lily learned my biscuit recipe, measuring flour with surgeon's focus. Ben discovered Thomas's old chisels in the garage and asked, very seriously, if I could teach him to make a birdhouse. That lasts. "I think Grandpa would like that," I said. By Friday morning, while Lily whisked eggs for pancakes, she asked, "Grandma, were you really getting confused like Mom said?" "No," I said. "I wasn't. She said that so people would think I couldn't make decisions anymore." "That's mean," she said, in that clear way kids have of naming truth. "Yes," I said. "It was." The phone rang that afternoon. Detective Ruiz. "Sabrina's been indicted on multiple counts: fraud, forgery, elder exploitation," she said. "Her parents, too." "Will she go to prison?" I asked. "Almost certainly." I looked at the backyard, the raised beds Thomas built, the aspen leaves trembling in a wind that smelled like snow. For the first time in months, I let my shoulders drop. When Mark came home that night, he looked hopeful. He'd seen our banker and our insurer. We'd recover a large chunk of the money. The company would stand. And my house, the house I'd been told I'd need to sell for my own good, was safe. "Grandma," Ben called from the doorway, "can we cut wood on Saturday?" "We can," I said, and realized that "we can" might be my new favorite phrase. 2 weeks after the arrest, a woman from the FBI called. But that part of the story is for another day. For now, I'll leave you with this. When people show you their plan for your life, believe them, then show them yours. 2 weeks later, while I was measuring flour with Lily and trying to keep Ben from taste testing the vanilla, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Ben bumped my elbow. The cap of the vanilla clattered to the counter, and I fumbled the phone with batter-dusted fingers. "Ms. Whitman, this is Special Agent Dana Morrison with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Do you have a minute to talk somewhere private?" The room stilled, despite the cartoon whistle of the kettle. I turned off the burner and told the kids to start whisking and counting Mississippi ones without me. In the pantry, with the door pulled almost shut, and the smell of cinnamon and baking powder surrounding me. I said yes. "I'll be brief," Agent Morrison said, voice crisp and not unkind. "The case involving your daughter-in-law isn't isolated. She's part of a larger operation targeting older business owners. We think she's been using multiple identities. We'd like to meet." The words "larger operation" landed like hail on a tin roof. "How much larger?" "Enough that we can't do this over the phone," she said. "Could you come by the Federal Building this afternoon?" I stood very still, listening to Lily counting aloud, and Ben explaining to no one that the secret to pancakes was not over-mixing. "I'll be there at 3, I heard myself say. Mark watched me from the doorway as I came out of the pantry, his eyes asking questions in a language we'd relearned together. "Everything okay?" "I need to run an errand later," I said, which was true and not nearly enough. "Agent with a lot of initials wants to talk. Do you want me to go with you?" I thought about the way his world had slid out from under him, then righted itself on a different foundation. "Let me hear it first," I said. "Then we talk." At 2:58, I sat in a bland conference room with a view of the parking structure and a curled fern that had seen better days. Agent Morrison entered with a file and a tablet, compact and self-contained, the kind of person who doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Another agent, a man with a trimmed beard and a habit of tapping his pen exactly 3 times before he spoke, took the chair by the door. "Ms. Whitman, thank you for coming," she said, taking a seat across from me. "Before we start, is anyone else aware of this meeting?" "My son knows I'm here," I said. "He doesn't know details." "That's fine." She opened the folder and, with the small ceremony of someone who understands the gravity of paper, slid a photograph toward me. It was Sabrina, except not quite. Younger, darker hair, a different smile that somehow was the same smile. "This is the woman you know as Sabrina," Morrison said. "We believe her legal name is Sarah Michelle Collins. She's used at least 4 identities in 12 years. In each instance, she married into families with successful small to mid-size businesses, embedded herself, and siphoned assets. When the money was sufficiently drained, she moved on." "Moved on," I repeated, the words feeling like ice on the back of my neck. "How many families?" 3 marriages prior to your son's," she said without theatrics, sliding a second photo to join the first. 2 widowers, 1 divorced within a year after a suspicious set of accidents at the business. In the widower cases, the men died. Unresolved accidents. "Unresolved?" I asked. "A single car crash on a rainless day with no skid marks," the pen tapper said quietly. "A fall down a flight of stairs in a home with a new runner that wasn't properly secured. Both ruled accidental deaths at the time. We are reopening them." The room swayed a fraction, not enough to be visible to other people. I was grateful for the chair under me. So when she lined up a guardianship and pushed the assisted living angle with me, "Backup plan," Morrison said. If the power of attorney strategy failed or raised alarms, she could pivot to more permanent solutions. Your paper trail and Detective Ruiz's speed changed the timeline. You pulled a thread. Everything started to unravel. I thought of Sabrina's voice in Mark's office, cool and sure, laying out the dates. By Christmas. The phrase had sounded like a deadline. Now it sounded like a mercy I would never owe her. "What do you need from me?" I asked, because grief can be folded and set aside when a job presents itself. "Your cooperation and your story," she said. "Your evidence is the most complete we've seen. It maps her methodically, gaining access, creating a narrative about your cognition, isolating you in your own home, then engineering financial control. We want to present this to a grand jury and use your case as a keystone to go after the entire network. shell companies she used before, the people who created false vendor profiles, the ones who taught her to get cozy with small-town banks. Network, I repeated, anger knitting itself into something steadier. Who else is out there? We don't know all of them yet, she said honestly, but every good case starts with one clear story. Yours is clear. They showed me more. Bank diagrams like subway maps, names that were probably aliases, filings in other states, a photo of Pam and Gerald from 10 years ago, with hair a shade darker and expressions that were less practiced but just as entitled. The agents didn't sensationalize. They laid out facts like tools on a bench, each with a purpose. When I left the building, the sky over the foothills had turned the yellow-pink of late fall. I sat in my car with my hands on the wheel and let the silence soak into me. My life had been a string of normal days hung on a thread someone else meant to cut. I thought about Thomas's steady laugh, Mark at 5 with knees perpetually skinned, Lily's pixie flags, Ben's earnest questions, and the soft, patient promise of the garden in winter. Some part of me that had been running finally sat down. At home, Mark met me on the porch before I made it to the door. What did they say? His voice had the crackle of kindling catching fire, fear and resolve meeting oxygen. She isn't Sabrina, I said. She's Sarah, and she's been doing this for a long time. He sat on the top step like a kid again, shoulders hunched in on themselves. I let her walk into our lives. You let a woman who pretended to be someone else come in, I said. Criminals are good at choosing decent people. It keeps them camouflaged. He stared out at the darkening yard. What does the FBI want? My story on record. They think my case will help them get the whole group. He nodded, jaw tight, then looser. Whatever you need, he said. Whatever they need. We told the kids only what they could carry. When Lily asked if Sabrina had a different name, Mark said, she used other names for work stuff, which was true enough for 10-year-old questions. Ben wanted to know if he could still make a birdhouse on Saturday, if the FBI came over. I told him yes, even if they brought a ruler and asked a lot of questions. The following week was a series of appointments that felt like walking the same neighborhood by different routes. Detective Ruiz's conference room with its whiteboard now covered in timelines, an interview with the assistant DA who specialized in family fraud, a brief meeting where Dr. Patel, flushed and contrite, assured me he'd flagged my chart so nobody could be misled by concerned family members again. Each time, I laid out the story the same way. The numbers first because paper doesn't lie, then the smaller cruelties because those explain how good people lose track of their own truth, then the plan she said out loud because predators eventually brag to someone. One afternoon in the middle of keys and timestamps, and could you read that exact date again, Miss Whitman? I remembered Sabrina's bone china cups replacing my mugs. It had seemed like an eccentricity at the time. Now it sat neatly in the column labeled, Break the Familiar. At night, after the kids were asleep, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table and paid bills, made lists for the company, and divided the kinds of tasks Thomas used to shoulder without anyone noticing. We kept the TV off. We listened to the house settling into itself. If grief arrived, we let it sit with us like another family member and didn't make it perform tricks. I was learning that dignity sometimes looks like not narrating pain while you feel it. The grand jury date came with cold wind that sent old leaves scratching across the street like mice. I wore the navy suit, the one I always wore to refinance meetings because bankers treat you differently when you look like you read the covenants. In the waiting area, Agent Morrison nodded to me once. A prosecutor with crisp hair and a calm voice explained how the questions might flow. Speak plainly, she said. Don't guess. If you don't know, say you don't know. If you need a minute, take it. I'm a builder, I said. I like things plum." She smiled at that, a real smile, not the kind you put on for photographs. "Then you'll do fine." Inside, 23 citizens looked at me from a U-shaped arrangement of chairs. I told them my name. I told them about Thomas and a company built board by board. I told them about discrepancies no one else clocked, because the amounts were designed to smuggle themselves under thresholds. I described Sabrina's Sunday night comments about modern cuisine and forgetfulness, her sudden generosity with my living room, and her cheerful announcement that her parents would be taking my bedroom, as if kindness looked like conquest. I gave them the numbers like fence posts in the ground, dates, amounts, vendors that never existed, cash flows that wove back to accounts with Sabrina's fingerprints on them. I told them about the Saturday I stood in a dark closet and listened to someone who had eaten at my table plot my legal erasure by Christmas. I did not cry, but I did let my voice sharpen when I said the word incompetent, because some words deserve edges. They asked careful questions. I answered them without the embroidery of anger. At the end, I looked directly at the foreperson and said, "She didn't just take money. She took my place in my own story." The room stayed still in the way rooms do when everyone understands the sentence that just landed. When I came out, Agent Morrison handed me water like we'd just finished a run. "You did exactly what we needed," she said. "Thank you." "If this helps other families," I said, "it's worth every retold detail." "It will," she said. "We'll be in touch." In the parking garage, I pressed my forehead briefly to the steering wheel and let half of what I was holding drain down my spine and into the seat. Then I drove to the elementary school, parked, and waited for the bell so I could watch Lily come out in her puffy jacket looking like a small astronaut and Ben gallop like a colt down the sidewalk. Normal can be the most radical luxury there is. In the days that followed, the case moved like a slow machine that's been greased at last. Sabrina's arraignment had already happened. Bail was denied. Her parents were transported to another jurisdiction to answer for old warrants. The paper ran a brief story with no names. Local economic crimes investigation leads to multiple arrests. In the grocery store, 2 different women stopped me and said they'd heard something and were bringing a casserole if we needed it. I said we were okay, and for once it wasn't a lie told to make someone else more comfortable. The house took to being ours, the way a field takes to rain after a long, dry spell. We moved the sofa back where the window light held conversation. I brought my grandmother's sideboard out from the garage where the movers had abandoned it without a scratch. The wood drank in lemon oil like a thirsty thing. Mark found Thomas's old record player, and after a Saturday of tinkering, made it hum again. On Sunday, we played a Billie Holiday album while Lily set the table with careful hands, and Ben insisted that centerpieces were just tiny forests and could include a plastic triceratops if the triceratops looked formal. Work was work. We hired an external firm to audit every account. Mark met with vendors, apologized where apologies were due, and did the quiet repair people often don't see but always feel. Our crew leads, the ones who had stayed because loyalty is the mortar in construction, stopped by my office to say we had their backs and they had ours. One of them, a man Thomas hired when he was 19 and cocky as a rooster, stood in my doorway and cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, "if you need weekends to yourself for a while, I'll run both sites." It was the kind of offer that asks nothing in return. I told him yes to Saturdays and brought him a loaf of Lily's banana bread on Monday. One evening, Mark came home with an envelope and a look like he'd been told a secret that wasn't bad news for once. "The bank signed off on an insurance recovery," he said, handing me the envelope. "It's not everything, but it's enough to keep us steady without stressing payroll. There's a check made out to you. Your share." The company needs it, I said automatically. The company is us, he said. You saved it. That has value and not just the kind you can write on a ledger. I looked at the envelope without opening it and thought of all the women I know who will justify away every gift to themselves because somebody else could use it more. I'll think about it, I said. And by think about it, I mean I might finally replace the dishwasher that sounds like a train. He laughed, real laughter that let something out of his chest. Dad hated that dishwasher. He said it kept him humble, I said. We left the envelope on the counter between a jar of marbles and a school permission slip and went out to the garage to help Ben measure boards for the birdhouse jig. The garage smelled like sawdust and motor oil and a life that keeps cheerfully making itself. A week later, Agent Morrison asked me to come in again. We're preparing a broader case, she said. Your testimony filled in gaps and opened doors. On her tablet, she showed me a list of shell companies that had dissolved and then reappeared with nearly identical names in neighboring states. She tapped one, and a web of lines connected to addresses, then to P.O. boxes, then to a rental in a different state where a person who had to be Pam collected mail in a floppy hat. It was like watching someone develop a photograph in a dark room, shadows resolving into faces. Will the other families get justice? I asked. I think so, she said. We're reopening the accidents. If we can prove homicide, we'll bring those charges too. I drove home the long way, up toward the reservoir where the light turns the water into polished coin at certain hours. I parked, rolled down the window, and let the wind pour through the car. The phrase, prove homicide, should have hollowed me out. Instead, I felt something that ached and healed at the same time, the sense that the world, for all its indifference, still sometimes chooses to put things back where they belong. On a Tuesday, Lily and I planted garlic in the raised beds, cloves tucked into soil like promises you keep with your hands. She told me about a girl in her class who thought Ben's Triceratops centerpiece was weird, and I told her weird can be a compliment when you're not afraid to be it. Ben came out with his sketch of a birdhouse and wanted to know if cedar lasts longer than pine and what dovetail joint means. I told him cedar shrugs at weather and showed him how dovetails hold like two hands clasped tight. He nodded solemnly and said, like family. On a Thursday, Mark and I met with our accountant at a conference table that had seen better coffee. We looked at spreadsheets that used to clamp my chest and now felt like maps. We talked about a second location on the south side, specializing in custom work for older clients who don't want stairs or surprises. We sketched out a partnership agreement that put my name where it should have been all along. Mark took a deep breath and said, Dad would like this. And I said, he would, and we let that be the benediction. One night near the end of the month, after the kids were in bed, and the house had gone to that true quiet that means everyone you love is safe under your roof, Mark brought out 2 glasses and a bottle Thomas saved for celebrations he never named in advance. He poured and handed me one, then stood there without speaking until I nodded. To what? He asked. To regular days, I said. We clinked and drank and listened to the small sounds, a branch scratching the window, the heater clicking, the almost silent hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of socks on wood. He stared at his glass. I still love part of her, he said, voice low. Or I love the person I thought she was. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it, I said. You felt what you felt. It means you're alive. It doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. He nodded, eyes bright in the lamplight. Thank you for not saying, I told you so. I didn't, I said, and we both smiled because we both knew. Winter edged in. The morning air got that crisp bite that makes your teeth feel cleaner. I bought a coat for Lily 2 sizes up because she keeps growing like she's racing someone, and gloves for Ben that he refused to wear because you can't feel the wood right with gloves. We made him wear them anyway, and compromised with fingerless ones when he was sanding. On Saturdays, we swept the garage as a team and pretended it didn't get messy again by Monday. The call came in early November. The grand jury returned indictments, Agent Morrison said. Federal charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering. State charges proceed as well. We'll coordinate. She paused. You may be asked to testify again. I'll be there, I said. Miss Whitman, she added, voice turning from official to something warmer. I've been doing this a long time. People rarely document what happened to them as clearly as you did while it was happening. That saved time. It may have saved your life. I thanked her. After we hung up, I went to the garage where Ben was hunched over the birdhouse jig, lip caught between his teeth, in concentration. I watched his small hands line up the pieces, the dovetails sliding into place with a snug little sound that felt like an answer. Mark leaned in the doorway beside me, shoulder to shoulder like when he was a lanky teenager taller than me for the first time. What did she say? More charges, I said. A lot of them. He let out a breath and nodded, not triumph, but something like relief finally coming into land. Okay, he said. Okay. We didn't celebrate. We didn't make a speech. We made soup and fed the kids and argued gently over whether Ben's dinosaur could be seated at the table if it wore a napkin. We decided yes. The Triceratops looked dapper, and the soup tasted better than it had any right to, and the house held us all without complaint. At night, sometimes, fear still slid up next to me in bed and reminded me of how close we'd come to losing everything that matters and nothing you can buy. I didn't chase it away with pep talks. I let it sit. It got bored eventually and went to bother someone else. In the morning, I put on boots and went out to the garden to see if the frost had left the kale alone and to top off the bird feeder for the juncos, who don't complain if you're late. When the first snow dusted the yard, Lily wrote her name on the back steps with a mittened finger, and Ben announced we had to build a second birdhouse for fairness. The dishwasher finally gave up mid-cycle with a dramatic death rattle. We replaced it with a quiet one that made me think of Thomas rolling his eyes and grinning. I kept the old door from Sabrina's sleek coffee table and told Mark I'd turn it into a bench for the mudroom, because sometimes you make use of what tried to make use of you. December blew in with light low over the mountains and the promise of a holiday that didn't have to be managed like a PR event. I dug out the wooden ornaments Thomas and I bought the year Mark was born, sanded a splinter from the rocking horse, and glued the tail on the little fox. That evening, as we strung the lights, Mark came back from the mailbox with a letter from the DA's office confirming court dates and explaining victims' rights in polite, dense language. He set it on the counter beside the marbles and the not-yet-deposited check. We read it after bedtime, each of us underlining a different sentence, without saying which one mattered more. Later, on the back porch, we stood in the cold with our breath floating like speech bubbles. The garden slept under a neat quilt of snow. The birdhouse Ben built looked stout and a little crooked, which is to say perfect. Do you ever think about what might have happened? Mark asked. He didn't have to say the rest. All the time, I said, because honesty had become our hearth. And then I think about garlic cloves under the soil and how they only need 2 things, time and the right kind of dark. He laughed softly. You've become a poet. I've become an old woman who finally says what she knows, I said. It's different. He reached for my hand and didn't let go. We stood there longer than the weather recommended, then went inside to tuck in kids who asked for one more chapter, one more song, one more glass of water. One more explanation of how a dovetail works, and we gave them what we could and promised what we couldn't with the kind of promise that binds more than it breaks. The trial would come. More revelations would scrape old wounds open and then clean them. There would be depositions and cross-examinations and the peculiar exhaustion of being asked to narrate a pain you didn't choose. There would be headlines I didn't clip, and an end I didn't attend because some endings don't need our eyes on them to be real. But for now, there was a house that had learned our footsteps again, a business with joists reinforced and leveled, a boy hammering tiny nails with his tongue sticking out, and a girl who asked if we could try a new recipe without apologizing for having an idea. There was the sound of the new dishwasher purring like a cat, and the old record player putting a crackle under Billie Holiday's voice, and there was the soft, sturdy truth that we had saved each other in all the quiet ways that don't get written down. Snow kept its promise and stayed. The yard wore a soft hat, the birdhouse a smaller one, and the kids discovered the particular joy of making footprints where no footprints had been. Inside, we made a life that would have bored Sabrina because no one applauded it. Breakfasts that started on time, homework that ended before dark, a business that stopped hemorrhaging and went back to the sturdy thrum of normal. Some nights I woke at 3 and sat on the edge of my bed, listening for the old house noises, timbers settling, wind fussing at the eaves, the heater starting like an old friend. If the dark tried to bring me the past, I let it talk for a minute, and then told it we had an early morning. There were depositions. There is a particular fatigue that comes from telling the truth, over and over to different people in different rooms with different pens. We learned which conference room had the bad chair with the uneven leg, which court reporter brought lemon drops and shared them like a grandmother, which deputy had a soft spot for Ben's dinosaur updates and always asked about Mr. Triceratops. I learned to bring a sweater that could be a blanket and a bottle of water that made a small, affirming click when you opened it. I told the story the same way each time because you can't build a house if the measurements change. One afternoon, in a windowless room that could have been anywhere, I sat across from a defense attorney who had perfected the smile people practice when they want to look sympathetic while not moving anything inside themselves. He leaned back, linked his fingers behind his head, and tried to sell me my own doubt. "Ms. Whitman," he said, "would you agree that sometimes older adults misremember details?" "I'll agree that sometimes people of all ages misremember details," I said. "And would you agree that you had conflicts with my client about household matters?" "Many," I said. She replaced my mugs. He tried to look confused and fell a little short. "Pardon?" "She replaced my mugs with delicate teacups," I said. "It's a small thing. Most of this is small things until you see how they point in the same direction." "And what direction is that?" "Isolation," I said. "Take enough familiar out of a person's day, and you can make them think they don't belong in their own life." He blinked, then glanced down at his notes, like they might give him a different script. When he asked if I had any animus toward his client, I told him I had a working spine, which is not the same thing. He didn't write that down. Sabrina did not look at me when they brought her into court for a pre-trial hearing. She wore county orange like a person who had never imagined she would wear county orange. Her hair was darker, her face paler, the simmering confidence replaced by a sharp, searching alertness I recognized from the early days when she was still building her version of us. She scanned the room in quick, bird-like cuts, landing on people she could not move anymore. When they read the federal counts, wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, she kept her eyes on the judge's sleeves. When the state prosecutor said the phrase, elder exploitation, something flickered under her left eye, like a signal nobody wanted to answer. "Does she see you?" Mark asked after, standing near the back with that tight, controlled posture you have to practice when you still ache. "She saw everything," I said. "She always does." We had not decided whether to attend the trial itself if it came to that. The assistant DA warned us that trials can make fools out of certainty, that defense strategies sometimes dress up as empathy, that there is a circus quality to public pain. "You don't owe the spectacle your presence," she said. "Your job is to tell the truth when asked, care for yourself and your family, and stay steady. You've done the first two. We'll call if we need the third." We went back to our company. We took on a remodel for a couple who had been putting it off for 5 years because grief had sat in their living room and refused to move. We built them a wide hallway for wheelchairs and a kitchen island that made space for the granddaughter who always wanted to sit in the middle of everything. We finished a deck for a retired math teacher who measured the railing posts himself and told me with absolute sincerity that numbers were patient if you were. I watched Mark run crews the way his father had, calm in a storm, direct without humiliating anyone, saying, "Good job," like he meant it because he did. We looked at a warehouse space on the south side and stood in the chill of it, imagining heat, walls, a front desk with a view. In late January, the assistant DA called. "We've offered a plea agreement in the state case," she said. "Given the federal charges, we don't need to put your family through a trial for the fraud counts here to ensure a long sentence. Your testimony is still crucial for the federal case, but this will narrow the scope." "What does she get if she pleads?" I asked. 8 to 12 on the state charges, served concurrent with whatever the federal judge imposes, she said. "We expect the federal time to be significantly longer." "Does she admit what she did?" "She admits to the elements of the crimes," the DA said. "Guilt on the record. It matters." I told Mark on the porch with our breath floating in small clouds. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets like a teenager, then kicked an invisible rock down the steps. "Good," he said. "I want it to be over." "It will be over in pieces," I said. "But yes, one piece." We did not attend the plea hearing. The paper ran another small story with fewer words than the first. The comments underneath were the usual soup of kindness, speculation, and the kind of certainty the internet sells cheap. I didn't read past the second paragraph. Agent Morrison kept us updated without drama. "The grand jury returned indictments on the federal counts," she said one afternoon, voice steady. "We'll move to trial. Your testimony is still our spine." She told me something else in that same no-embroidery tone. They had found enough in the reopened death investigations to bring homicide charges in one of the earlier marriages. Not here, not us, but a man who had died alone in a stairwell now had a name on a docket beside the word victim, in a way that could speak for him. "His family," I said. "Do they know?" "They do," she said. "They cried. Then they said thank you." I sat in my car outside the grocery store and watched people push carts and bicker about cereal and pick bruised apples with care. The world kept going in the way it does. I felt less like a person watching a film from the back row and more like someone who had taken a place back at the table. The relief was not firecrackers. It was a warm hand on your back while you stand at the sink. A week later, our lawyer called with a question I hadn't expected to answer. "Laurel," she said, "Sabrina's counsel reached out. She wants to meet with you and Mark. Not alone," she added quickly. "With counsel present. They say she wants to apologize." "Is that common?" I asked. "Not rare," she said carefully. "Sometimes defendants want to control the script one last time. Sometimes they actually need to say it out loud. Sometimes they're hoping for a statement from victims that might help at sentencing. If you go, You set the rules. If you don't, you lose nothing. I told Mark. He went very still for a count of 4. If I see her, I will either say nothing or say too much, he said. I don't want to find out which. I could go, I said. He shook his head. You've already done enough alone, he said. If you go, I go. We went. The room was small, the table scarred, the light ugly in the way institutional light is ugly. Sabrina was thinner. Her hair had lost the precise color upkeep that used to be part of her armor. She watched us walk in, then fixed her eyes on the pitcher of water, like it might give her a better story. Thank you for coming, her lawyer said. He looked tired in a human way that made me feel less like I'd walked onto a television set and more like we were all just people who needed naps. Sabrina spoke first. I'm sorry, she said, voice low. For what? I asked. Because words mean things, and I wanted them to mean the right things. For what I did, she said. To your company? To your family? To me? Mark asked, and his voice did not break, which must have cost him. She swallowed. To you. And to my children? He asked. She looked at the table. Yes. And to my mother, he said, when you tried to have her declared incompetent so you could take her life and call it care. She closed her eyes like someone who has finally decided to remove a splinter properly. Yes, she said. He waited. He was done helping her finish sentences. I don't expect you to forgive me, she added. I just needed to say the words. She did not ask about Lily and Ben. She did not ask about the house or the season or the small lives that go on without her. There was a blank in her apology where curiosity should live. I realized, sitting across from her in that ugly light, that Sabrina was good at calculating harm and not at loving anyone she hadn't assigned a value to. It is its own kind of poverty, and I felt the smallest ache for it, an ache no one would see because we hadn't built our house on the outside. Mark nodded once, not absolution but acknowledgement that she had said the thing out loud. I hope the truth finds you, he said, even if it hurts. He stood. I stood. We left. In the parking lot, he sat with his hands on the steering wheel, and I watched the muscle in his jaw relax by degrees. I thought I would shake, he said. I didn't. You've done your shaking, I said. Now you're doing your living. The federal trial was scheduled for spring. We prepared the way you prepare for a storm that may or may not hit your neighborhood. We stacked what needed stacking. We made sure the kids' routines were a machine we could run with one hand. We told Lily there would be some days we couldn't pick her up, but someone else who loved her would, and she asked if Aunt Rosie from down the street counted as someone who loves me. And I said yes, and meant it. On the morning I testified, the courthouse hallway felt like a bus station. People moving in purposeful lines, others stalling and looking lost. 1,000 stories intersecting briefly, and then peeling away to their separate endings. In the witness room, the prosecutor went over the direct questions again, the ones that would build the skeleton. She reminded me not to fight with the defense on cross. Your steadiness is your strength, she said. You've built this case with patient blocks. Don't let them talk you into a sprint. On the stand, I told the story I'd told in rooms with worse air and better chairs. Numbers first, because numbers don't flinch. Then the texture that makes numbers make sense. Mugs replaced without consent. Kitchen drawers rearranged as if you live in a hotel with new management. Front row seats rescinded like privileges. Then the closet and the phone call and the words, by Christmas, which turned the jury's faces down into their notes, as if they wanted to write the date somewhere it could not move. The defense tried. They asked about my age. I told them. They asked if I'd ever misplaced an object. I said yes, my reading glasses, and sometimes my patience. They asked if I might have misheard parts of the phone call. I asked if they had ever heard a person more clearly when they were hiding. The judge told me to answer what was asked. I said, "No, I did not mishear." The defense tried to suggest that I had an axe to grind because of the birthday party decorations, and I said, "I had a grandson who wanted to make a birdhouse that outlasts a winter, and I taught him a dovetail. I am not a woman who sharpens axes for sport." When I stepped down, the prosecutor's eyes said, "Well done," without needing to say anything. Outside the courtroom, Agent Morrison stood with a paper cup of coffee and a nod like a salute. "Almost there," she said. We did not sit in the gallery after that. We went home and folded laundry and fixed a leak under the sink and showed up for school pickup on time with muffins wrapped in napkins so the teacher wouldn't give us a look about crumbs. We cooked dinner and told Lily about the math teacher's deck and listened to Ben explain the difference between titmice and chickadees like an expert. In the quiet moments, I thought of the jurors sitting with the weight of other people's lives in their hands. I hoped someone had brought them lemon drops. The verdict came on a Wednesday afternoon with wind that wanted to take your hat off and roll it down the block. We were home when the call came. The prosecutor's voice carried the tension and the relief both. "Guilty on all counts," she said. The judge remanded her, sentencing in 6 weeks. I said thank you and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the fruit bowl like it was a painting I hadn't appreciated until then. Mark came in from the garage, dust in his hair, and read my face and didn't ask the question because he already knew the answer. "Okay," he said, leaning his hip against the table. "Okay." We did not cheer. We did not pop anything. We started dinner and answered a multiplication question and watched the light move across the floor, like a river does, when it knows where it's going. 6 weeks is both forever and a blink. In that time, bulbs we planted in the fall shouldered up in the bed like small flags. The birdhouse acquired tenants. The dishwasher hummed its reliable hum. We signed the lease on the south side space and hired a painter who, when asked about color, said, "Happiness that doesn't get on your nerves." And we all agreed that was the brief. I had a sign made that read, "Whitman Builders, Custom Homes and Aging-in-Place Solutions," then stared at the ampersand for a long minute and thought about partnerships that deserved their names on paper. On the morning of sentencing, Mark asked if I wanted to go. We looked at each other for a few seconds that felt like flipping a coin in the air and deciding before it landed what you wanted it to be. "I don't need to be there," I said. "I know what happened. I don't need a stranger to tell me it mattered." "Me too," he said. We made pancakes instead. We poured syrup and wiped a small spill with a clean cloth and laughed when Ben declared that the first pancake is always for the dog you don't have, which is why you should eat it quickly. After breakfast, we went to the shop and reviewed a site plan and answered 3 emails about back orders in language that made vendors feel like partners, not suspects. In the early afternoon, the prosecutor called. The judge imposed a life sentence without the possibility of parole, she said. On the federal counts, the state sentence runs concurrent. "Life," I repeated. The word did not feel like a fist. It felt like a door that finally stopped slamming in the wind. "I know that's a lot to hear," she said. "It's all so simple," I said. "Thank you." There would be appeals. There are always appeals. There would be paperwork. There is always paperwork. But the loudest part had ended. We moved in the quiet. Spring settled into its well-worn groove. On Easter, the kids ran in the yard in socks because they had abandoned shoes like they always do, and we ate ham that Mark carved while explaining the virtues of cutting against the grain. Lily set the table with my grandmother's china that had survived things I hadn't known how to name yet when I packed it into the garage. Ben placed the Triceratops in the center with a napkin folded like a bow tie. We said grace differently than we did when Thomas was alive. Not better, not worse, just in the voices we had now, grateful in the bone-deep way you get when you almost lost something you can't replace. After dishes, Mark pulled an envelope from his pocket and set it on the counter. "The insurance recovery came through," he said. "There's a separate check for you." "You still think I should replace the dishwasher?" I asked, and he grinned because the dishwasher was already new, and the joke was the point. "I think you should do whatever you want that starts with I want," he said. I opened the envelope and didn't look at the number first. I looked at my name. It came with a slight tremor in my chest, the kind that says, "You can." I thought about the women I know who hand their wants away like they're too heavy to carry, and then find themselves with nothing but excuses in a bag that used to be full of them. I folded the check back into the envelope and slid it into the drawer with takeout menus and rubber bands and a tape measure. "I'll think," I said, and meant it the way you do when a promise is to yourself. On a warm evening in May, we moved chairs to the back porch and watched the sky stack colors like quilts. Mark brought out a bottle Thomas had earmarked and never opened, and 2 small glasses. He poured a finger in each and handed me one. "To what?" he asked. "To the kind of day that doesn't make the news," I said. We touched rims and sipped. The kids were inside finishing a puzzle that had no picture on the box because life is cheeky like that. A breeze came across the yard and made the wind chimes sing just enough, not too much. The birdhouse had babies. You could hear them if you held your breath. "Do you hate her?" Mark asked, in the quiet way you ask a person who has proved they won't lie to you. "I hate what she did," I said. "I hate what she tried to take. I hate the hours we don't get back." "And her?" he asked. "I don't have the energy to hate a person I don't have to see again," I said. "Hate is expensive. I'm trying to be thrifty." He smiled without teeth. "I still love the person I thought she was sometimes," he said. "It feels like a bruise that forgot to go away." "That makes you human," I said, "and generous in ways she never deserved." He nodded and looked toward the garden. "Do you think Dad would be proud of us?" "I think he already is," I said. "And I think he's laughing that the dishwasher finally doesn't sound like a train." We titled the second location lease to both of us. The sign went up. The first week, a couple in their 70s came in with a folder of magazine clippings and a piece of graph paper with a dream drawn in pencil, all windows and no closets. We showed them where walls would want to be. We talked about ramps, you forget. Our ramps, because beauty did its job. We listened to the way they said home, like a word that deserved a good coat of paint. On a Tuesday in June, I stood up from my desk and felt a quiet click inside my chest, like a bone slipping back into its socket. It wasn't fireworks. It was alignment. I walked to the break room and poured coffee and watched my son across the floor, talking with a foreman, hands making the shapes of beams and spans in the air. I thought, for the millionth time, of Thomas, and I wanted to tell him everything, and then realized I already had in the language of carrying on. That weekend, Lily and I planted zinnias because they don't mind heat, and they show off without apology. Ben added a second story to the birdhouse because the market demands it, and I told him to get a permit, and he told me to mind my business, and we laughed in the way you do when everyone is happy to be corrected by someone small. On Sunday night, the 4 of us sat on the living room floor and made a list of summer goals. Lily wanted to learn to ride her bike with no hands. Ben wanted to identify 10 new birds. Mark wanted to take the kids camping and not burn the marshmallows, which we all voted down because burnt marshmallows are the point. I wrote, "Go to the reservoir and do nothing," and underlined the nothing twice. Sometimes, late, I still reached up and touched the place on my throat where fear used to sit like a hand. It was not gone, but it was not in charge. I learned to recognize the difference between a memory and a prophecy. I learned that quiet can carry teeth. I learned that people who tried to write me out of my own story had underestimated the narrator. On a morning heavy with heat and the smell of cut grass, I stood in the doorway of my room, the room that is my room again, and ran my fingers over the blue paint Thomas called July sky. The light made a square on the floor like a gift with no bow. Down the hall, Lily argued with a shoelace and won. Ben explained to the dog we still didn't have that it couldn't have the first pancake. In the kitchen, the dishwasher purred, and the fruit bowl looked like a painting, and the envelope with my name on it lived in a drawer with useful things. When I left for work, I locked the door out of habit, and something like gratitude. I looked back once, the way people do in good movies when they've decided to live. The house looked back, not sentimental, just steady. If you're still listening, thank you. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what quiet victories you've had lately, the ones nobody claps for but that hold the roof up. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of story, where the good guys don't ride in on horses but show up with paperwork, lemon drops, and the kind of love that goes on the deed. Summer leaned in hard, the kind where the air over the blacktop wobbles and the ice in your glass sighs before you finish the drink. At the South Side shop, the painter matched happiness that doesn't get on your nerves, and somehow bottled it for our walls. We put a bowl of hard candies on the counter, because Thomas always said small sweetness at the right time is as strategic as it is kind. People came in carrying folders and hopes. We put both on the table and measured them until they made sense. One afternoon, a woman about my age walked in with a man who might have been her brother. They stood just inside the door the way people do when they aren't sure they're allowed to want something. "Can we help you?" I asked. She took a breath like someone stepping into a pool. "We need a ramp," she said. "We've needed one for years." "We can do ramps you forget are ramps," I said. "Show me the door you use the most." They spread a phone with pictures on the counter and told me about thresholds that felt like insults, and we sketched out a plan that didn't require stairs to surrender beauty. When they left with a bid and a calendar date, the woman squeezed my hand and said, "You speak like someone who's been told no and did it anyway." I told her we're trying to build a company that says yes, carefully and often. Agent Morrison called every couple of weeks. The calls got shorter, the news more precise. A second homicide charge stuck in a different state. A plea from one of the people who had helped set up shell companies. He traded testimony for fewer years. Pam and Gerald took deals that made long shadows across maps they used to drive with such confidence. Each update felt like tying off a suture, clean, necessary, and never the point of why we were alive. One morning, I was trimming lavender in the garden when a sedan I didn't recognize pulled up in front of the house. A man and a young woman got out. Father and daughter, by the way they moved near each other but didn't crowd. He wore the kind of suit you keep even if you switch jobs because it saw you through something. She carried a bakery box like a peace offering. "Ms. Whitman?" the man asked from the walkway, careful not to step into the beds. "I'm Ethan Hale. This is my daughter, Rowan." I knew the name from one of Agent Morrison's updates, the widower from a case 3 states over, the one with the stairwell, the one they were finally calling by his name in documents. He shook my hand, then reached for words that didn't want to be domesticated. "We wanted to thank you," he said, "for whatever it's worth." Rowan held out the box. Inside were 4 cinnamon rolls that had no right to be as beautiful as they were. "My dad doesn't like to buy flowers," she said. "He says sugar is a better apology." "You owe me no apology," I said, and meant it in all the directions it could go. We sat at the table with coffee and the kind of small talk that sits between strangers until it isn't strange anymore. Then he looked up and said, "They told me about the phone call you heard. It's the only reason I sleep." "Some nights I still don't," I said, because the truth had become our family policy, and sometimes policies are friendships waiting to happen. Rowan asked Lily about zinnias and Ben about dovetails. Lily explained that zinnias are the extroverts of the flower bed. Ben told her a dovetail is like two hands deciding to be serious. Ethan walked through the house slowly, not touching anything, then stopped at the window that looks out at the birdhouse. "My wife wanted one of those," he said, eyes still on the little square structure. "We never got around to it." He stood a moment longer, then nodded once, as if some part of him had finally received the memo that the day had changed. They didn't stay long. People who have carried a heavy thing know how not to overstay a moment that's working. They left the bakery box, 2 rolls untouched, and Rowan wrote her number on the lid. "If you ever want to plant daffodils, I can help," she said. "I like planting things that come back." That night, after the kids were in bed, Mark stood in the doorway with his shoulder against the frame, watching me load the dishwasher that didn't sound like a train. "You okay?" he asked. "I think I'm learning to be," I said. He nodded. "Me too." We opened the Southside shop on a Monday with no ribbon because I didn't want to make scissors into a symbol. Our crew showed up with fresh pencils behind their ears and that gallows humor construction workers keep in their tool belts for when weather and supply chains turn on them. The first client was a retired paramedic who wanted a bathroom she could trust at 2 a.m. The second was a couple who'd been arguing about whether to take down a wall for 15 years and needed someone neutral to tell them it wouldn't make the ceiling fall. We put the sign with both our names on the front door, and it made a sound only I could hear every time it swung open. Earned. On a Wednesday in late July, I walked into the shop with iced tea for the crew and found Mark in the office, staring at a framed photograph of Thomas on a beam like a blessing. For a second, I thought he was crying. He wasn't. He was smiling in a way I had not seen since he was 19 and had just figured out how to make a compound miter cut that impressed his father. "I offered Javier the foreman role at South," he said, turning to me. He said yes. "You trust him," I said. "I do," he said, "and I think Dad would tell me to stop hoarding responsibility, like it's the only way I know how to love." "We can expand the circle without thinning it," I said, because it was a sentence I needed to hear as much as he did. We celebrated with tacos from the truck that parks near the scrapyard and serves salsa hot enough to make truth sound different. Javier cried and pretended it was the salsa. We pretended to believe him and hugged him too hard. The last hearing I had to attend was administrative and dull by design. A clerk read words into a record so the record would not be able to forget. When we left, Detective Ruiz was in the hallway, leaning against a marble column like a person on break from a life. She looked lighter in the face, less like someone carrying a debt that was never hers. "Thank you," I told her. "Just my job," she said, then let the smallest smile appear. "But the lemon drops are mine." We laughed, exchanged that particular kind of nod that says we might never see each other again, and will still be grateful when we think of the other at odd angles. She turned to go, then paused. "You know," she said, "we tell people not to keep secrets to protect families, and that's true. But I want you to know, your instinct to love your son first didn't make this harder. The wrong person made it hard. You did the right thing when you could, as fast as you could." I stood there with the ugly carpet under my shoes and let that sentence relieve me in places I didn't know were still braced. I won't pretend there weren't days when I felt anger like a splinter I couldn't get with tweezers. A small constant hurt that made even good moments aware of it. It flared when I signed a form labeled victim, when a bank manager apologized 3 times in one sentence like penance could be immediate, when Lily brought home a school flyer about Grandparents' Day and asked whether she should put my name or Grandmother Pam, because some people still remember. I didn't steamroll the splinter with slogans. I sat with it. Some days it worked its way to the surface. Some days it didn't. On those days, I went to the garage. Wood tells the truth and rewards patience. In August, we hosted a small cookout for our crews and their families behind the Southside shop. String lights, folding tables, coolers, paper plates, laughter that started low and got serious. The kids made a fort out of sawhorses and drop cloths. The foreman argued gently about baseball. Someone brought a pie that leaned to one side like a person who has decided to thrive anyway. I stood back by the open roll-up door and watched it all land. Mark came to stand next to me. "You made this," he said. "We made this," I said. "I want to put you on the paperwork as senior partner for both locations," he said. "Not just the cards, the filings." "You already did," I said, and his head snapped toward me. "You opened the mail?" he asked. "I am wild that way," I said, and we both grinned like thieves who had decided to return everything with interest. School started early because the district decided the calendar needed to chase heat. Rowan sent a picture of daffodil bulbs with the caption, "October," and Lily wrote back, "Yes," without asking me, because she knows some decisions are already made. Ben's birdhouse got a second tenant, this time a family of house wrens who scolded everyone for walking by too loudly. We accommodated their temper like you do neighbors. Agent Morrison called once more in early fall. "Appeals denied at the first pass," she said. "It will still take time, but the structure is holding." "Thank you," I said, "for the structure and the sentence and the steadiness." "Right back at you," she said. "I didn't visit Sabrina. I didn't send a letter. She existed now in a place time couldn't use to hurt us. I pictured her sometimes in county-issue shoes and wondered if she had found a person she couldn't move. I didn't celebrate that thought. I just let it remind me that the universe is not sentimental, but sometimes it is fair. We planted the daffodils in October with Rowan and Ethan and half the block, because news spreads neighbor to neighbor when the thing you're doing is both ordinary and right. We tucked the bulbs in, pointed sides up, in rows that would look like math for months, and like joy in spring. Ben asked if we could plant anything that exploded. Lily told him that's what bees are for. Ethan stayed after everyone left and helped me coil the hose. He looked different than he had in summer, less like a man bracing for impact, more like one who has remembered where the break is. "I brought something," he said, reaching into the truck and handing me a small wooden carving of a bird, sanded smooth, the grain running like water. "Margaret made these," he said. "I found a box in the attic. She meant to give them away and didn't get the chance." "It will live on our shelf," I said, "where we remember to look." That night, the wind came through with that particular mountain edge that says seasons aren't suggestions. We closed windows and added blankets and made tea we didn't need. I stood at the sink and watched the back porch light carve a square on the steps, thinking of garlic under soil and bulbs in sleep, and a house that holds a family that holds its shape. When winter returned, it did what winter does, slowed us without our permission, and then asked if we wanted to be friends. We said yes with soups and early bedtimes and the daily kindness of doing the dishes before they accuse you. The second location hit a stride. We hired an apprentice who reminded me of Mark at 19 in his insistence that he was good, not lucky. and we told him luck is just the name we give the times we were ready. Lily learned to ride with no hands for 2 driveway lengths and came in flushed with victory. Ben identified 12 new birds and gave them all nicknames that stuck. We put a little tree on the counter at the south shop and decorated it with tiny tape measures and pencils because builders will make anything into a reminder. On New Year's morning, the 4 of us stood on the back porch in our coats and socks and watched a sky that couldn't quite decide on a color. Mark handed out mugs of cocoa. The birdhouse had icicles like earrings. Lily asked what we were going to do differently this year. Ben asked what we were going to keep exactly the same. Both, I said. We'll keep the good and change the rest. After breakfast, I went to my room and stood in the doorway long enough to memorize the way the light landed so I could carry it with me into days that would try to forget. I set the wooden bird Ethan had brought on the bookshelf next to a picture of Thomas holding Mark on a beam that no longer exists, both of them grinning like men who don't mind work. I opened the drawer with the rubber bands and the takeout menus and the tape measure and the envelope with my name and took out the check. Then I put it back, not because I was afraid to spend it, but because I liked the power of choosing when. Some things are sweeter for waiting. If you've come this far, thank you for holding the line with me. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the small wins you've decided to count. New dishwashers that purr, birdhouses that fill, peace that shows up on a Tuesday for no reason. Subscribe if you want these quiet victories in your feed. I can't promise fireworks. I can promise foundations and the kind of endings that look a lot like beginnings dressed in work clothes. Sometimes the people who set out to break us reveal the beams we didn't know we had. Sometimes the rescue looks like paperwork, lemon drops, a detective who believes you, a doctor who admits he was wrong, a son who moves his chair closer, and kids who ask about dovetails at the table where you eat. Sometimes ordinary Tuesday is a miracle in its street clothes. The house is ours. The business is steady. The garden sleeps with secrets it intends to keep. And every so often, late at night, I sit on the edge of my bed and listen for the old house noises and realize they sound like a lullaby again. Thanks for listening. I mean that. Your voice matters here.